Hi, my name is Ariana Lopes, and today I'm going to be talking about the depiction of social stratification in the film Parasite, a social class theory analysis. First, I want to start with a quote that says, I try to express a sentiment specific to Korean culture. All the responses from different audiences were pretty much the same. Essentially, we all live in the same country called capitalism. This is a quote by Bong Joon-ho, the film director of Parasite. For my research question, how does using social class theory helps understand how social stratification is depicted in the movie Parasite? Now, for my overview, I'm going to be going over the introduction of issue, semiotic analysis, social class theory, film analysis, and lastly, implications. So first, let's look at the issue. So, in the middle of the 20th century, we saw how Korea split into two by war into North Korea and South Korea. This converts North Korea into a totalitarian state and it still prevails to this day. But after that, a political shift happens years later. Then, in the late 1970s and mid 1990s, we can witness with actually a lot of South Korean films how this middle class was created, which was built with social entrapments that just made what is now social distinctions. Now, when this was happening, South Koreans they were faced with a lot of pressure, stress, and identity issues. But with this also came a lot of growing into freedom as things were changing. And this is when actually cinema became really a substantial part of the people during this type of struggles during this time of the war. Now, at first, the South Korean film industry actually was limited with citizenship when directors were forced to create works for propaganda, and the majority of the films that were made between the end of the Korean War and the Social Revolution, they had to give the South Korean government, the military, this good image. So what they would do is that they would take any film and they would edit it. They would even change the whole narrative of the film just so that it could benefit them and just fit into their standards or just anything they wanted. Now, there's two movies, The Handmaiden in 2016 and Old Boy 2003. They are still really impactful because they connect with the people what was happening during the Korean War. So in Handmaiden, this provides really notable depictions of just families and loved ones that they were being separated by greater powers than themselves. And it also had an analogy to the results of the Korean War. And the same thing with Old Boy, it had a lot of depictions, enslavement, and just occupation, and it had actually served as this depiction of self-inflicted entrapment. That was things that South Koreans were dealing with at that time. Now, in the mid of the 1990s, there was this liberation of cinema in South Korea, which allowed a lot of things to be explored, like different genres, filming methods, and just topic. And this is actually when the culture became really obsessed with movies. But this was no longer of, well, the government would allow this or that because they had freedom already, but actually it was if the film directors were going to live to that standard because at that time they had and actually this identity crisis that they were struggling with in films as all they saw was propagandas and just think the benefit with the government, but they never saw this thing that they could connect with in films. Now, this is a really an impactful film. It was something that changed the South Korean culture. It actually created a new wave. This is the movie Peppermint Candy in 1999 by Lee Chan-dong, which is about a businessman who just loses control after years of work, stress, and just class pressure, as just everyone was experiencing it. And this actually brought this wave, which it's called in Chinese as Hallyu, which is Korean New Wave or Korean Wave. And this Korean wave, it's centered on everyone's everyday's problems, which was life, business work corrupts, and just this powerful, just social hierarchy within every institution, just as schools. Teachers were being corrupt, police officers were being corrupt. They were doing illegal stuff, and school teachers they were abusing their powers. But there was nothing that you can do because justice and equality just it was not expected by anyone, not by an institution, not by any individual. And at that time, you cannot even say anything because you were just endangering your status, your position, what people would think about you, your job, and they were having a really hard time in those moments. So there was not anything that they could do. So by what was depicted in that movie, they felt really connected that they created this new wave, which is really important for South Korean culture. Now let's look at the film analysis type, which I'm going to be doing semiotic analysis. What is semiotics? What is semiotic analysis? What is it? So semiotics is also called semiology. It's the study of science and sign use and behavior. Actually, semiotic analysis, it goes just beyond the surface of the message because it uses verbal signs, but also visual and auditory ones. And it just has this more like deeply meaning structures, and it helps us understand which elements that are being created. Now, the modern disciplines of semiotics can be said to have begun with two men, which you can see here on the picture, which is Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure and American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce, and they call this as the study of the life of science within society. Now, for the history of semiotics, it went through a lot of things. It went from being an investigation from linguistics to psychology, then it went to sociology, then to the analysis of films, and what we know now is that it's being used as a method for research and just analyzing consumer behavior and branding, as we're doing right now with films. Now, it is really important because filmmakers, they are really reliant on these signaling forms. They have developed just this amazing visual language that the audience they can enjoy, and I feel like semiotics are really vital, but they yet are challenging aspect, and that is something that filmmakers do just amazingly, and we enjoy it as it is the interpretation. And it transmits signs and symbols in order so that we can, as the audience, construct a plot and just describe different events by encoding this and just being inside this narrative that the directors enjoy and they enjoy making. Now, there are many specific signs in films that actually convey messages for the audience to decode, and that's when we have the two-part signs. We have the signified and the signifier. The signified is a psychological part, the reaction to the object, the mental picture. A signifier evokes the internal response to the signifier. So this is just something mental. Then we have the signifier, which is actually the physical part. It is something tangible. It is something we see or hear. It is something that we can perceive. Now here we have the three types of signs, which actually were the three main types of signs for peers. Um, the previous a person that we talked about, and here the icon or sign is similar to what it signifies, and the index is affected by what it represents, and the symbol is something that is connected to what it signifies by law. Now let's talk about the social class theory. Social class, or if you want to call it class, is just a hierarchy. It's just a way of breaking down society. So we have this comparison of how much power someone has or a group of people have just in comparison to another group or individual between the same society. Now, here we have Karl Marx and Max Weber, which were two German theorists who affected the study of sociology. And with Karl Marx, we have Marxism. Karl Marx actually did not see class as some like a theory, a concept, or like a theoretical concept or just a social construct, but he actually saw it as this defining line, this defining tension of capitalism. And he believed that history was just this long, long struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeois. So, who are they? The bourgeois is a class that owns and controls property, even the means of production. And then we have the proletariat, which is the working class, that they own nothing and they just work in return for a wage. Now, let's look at the film analysis of the movie Parasite. So Bong Joon-ho does an amazing job with this thing of poor versus poor, and that is something we don't see a lot of the times. We normally see rich versus poor, and he does this with camera angle, color, music, and lighting. So in this scene, we see how the Kim family they're having a good time, the Parks family, And then Moon Gwang, who was someone that used to work there, but the Kim family intentionally fired her for their benefit. She comes home, she says that she forgot something, and actually is that she has been hiding her husband in the basement. So when all of this chaos is happening, the camera angle, it changes the colors, as you can see from the first to the second picture. It's a lot more darker, and you have this sense of like tension of what is going to happen in the music too. And then we see when poor versus poor comes into place, that these two families, they're doing something wrong. The Kims are not supposed to be there, and Moongwan is not supposed to be there with her husband also. But instead of helping each other, they actually start fighting of who's going to stay there. So what we see, this is not a class struggle between the rich versus poor, but poor versus poor, judging each other, fighting with each other of who is going to get into a higher position. Now we have above versus below, which Bong Joon-ho did an amazing job with this. First, it starts with angles. This scene starts with the Kim family actually hiding underneath a table, and then the Park family, they're lying on the couch, the wife and the husband, and we can infer, below is always going to be the poor, and then above them is always going to be the rich. And then Mr. Park, who is the rich man, he starts talking about Mr. Kim and how people who ride the subway have a special smell. As you can see in the second picture, he's talking about Mr. Kim and how his smell just crosses the line and he doesn't like it. So he thinks that everyone that is poor just has that bad smell of being on the subway. Then we see that at the parks, Mr. and Mrs. Park, they have intimacy, but something really weird happens where they start fetishizing the struggles of the poor, and they start talking about underwear being poorly made, and then drugs, and they just imagine things like that where they have an intimacy, and this can just tell us how empty they are and how superficial they are and how they really don't care, and they just see they see that the poor are not equal as them. They see it something that is not even near them. Now we have their reality. Bong Joon-ho does this with colors, angles, and music. This is the reality versus the dream. Ki-woo wakes up in the hospital after the incident, after the murder, and he starts laughing because he thinks that the people that are there, which is a police officer and a doctor, they don't fit into the positions, and he thinks that it's happening the same thing that it happened in the house with him trying to fit into the rich house, right? And what Bong Joon-ho is trying to say here is that this is something that a lot of people feel, and that the world is filled with people that aren't simply qualified for the role like they did. They were the poor, as they were tutors for the rich. But even if people are not qualified for the role, if you're rich, then you're gonna have the opportunities, but it's not the same thing for the poor. So in a capitalist society, if you're poor, even if you do have the skills, you will continue to be poor, sorry. But if you're rich, maybe you might not have the skills, there's always gonna be an opportunity for you. So on the second picture, we can see how Q is actually. At first, we think that is actually true. He bought the house. He made plans with his dad, because his dad is actually in the basement as Moongwon's husband. He's repeating the same thing, the same cycle. And we can see that he bought the house, but it's actually not true, as you can see on the third picture. And it was all a dream, and you can see that with the music at the end of the movie, which says that it would take Kiwoo 500 years to buy that house. Okay, now my implications. So one of my implications is that Bong Joon-ho uses his movies to bring light to the social issues of South Korea, as we see with his movies Snowpiercer, that is about a train that now has social divisions. It's the end of the world, and they still have social divisions. They still have that social hierarchy, and the same thing with Okja, and the same thing with his movie Barking Dog Never Bite, where it's about a couple that also struggle because they are poor. So he's trying to bring light into this capitalist world, and we all can connect with that. So what he's trying to do is trying to bring light to the social issues of South Korea, but it actually resembles with the rest of the world. And now we have social stratification and capitalism. What we sorry what we can see is that social class theory actually helps understand how social stratification is employed in the film Parasite by just demonstrating underlying political and social themes. It has takes also on capitalism, Marxism, and just the subsequent social hierarchies. And with Marxism, it helps us build the personifications of economic relations and economic categories in films, as it effectively spotlights evident divisions between upper and lower classes through intense symbolism, as I previously mentioned with the smell from Mr. Kim, and how it leads to motifs that later create themes throughout the film. Now, for my conclusion, today, we were able to examine the movie Parasite by researching how social stratification was depicted in the film, then examining semiotic analysis and its importance, and finally using social class theory as a lens to analyze the film Parasite. We derived three vital implications from this analysis, which is how the director Bong Joon-ho uses his films as a light to social issues, how social class theory helps us understand the film as it was able to demonstrate political and social themes, its takes on capitalism, Marxism, and social hierarchies, and also how Marxism is present into building this kind of personifications of economic relations and economic categories through symbolism. And as in the beginning, I mentioned Bong Joon Ho's quote where he said that he created this movie directed to and resembling Korean culture, but a lot of people felt connected with it, and that's why we live in a world, a country called capitalism. Thank you so much. These are my references. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.